Book 1, Chapter 10 of A Voyage towards the South Pole and round the World, Volume 1, by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 10. Arrival of the ships at Otaheite, with an account of the critical situation they were in, and of several incidents that happened while they lay in Oaiti Piha Bay. 1773 August. On the 15th at 5 o'clock in the morning we saw Osnaburg Island, or Maitea, discovered by Captain Wallis, bearing south by west a half west. Soon after I brought to, and waited for the Adventure to come up with us, to acquaint Captain Furneaux that it was my intention to put into Oaiti Piha Bay, near the south-east end of Otaheite, in order to get what refreshments we could from that part of the island, before we went down to Matavia. This done, we made sail, and at 6 in the evening saw the land bearing west. We continued to stand on till midnight, when we brought to, till 4 o'clock in the morning, and then made sail for the land, with a fine breeze at east. At daybreak we found ourselves not more than half a league from the reef. The breeze now began to fail us, and at last fell to a calm. This made it necessary to hoist out our boats to tow the ships off, but all their efforts were not sufficient to keep them from being carried near the reef. A number of the inhabitants came off in canoes from different parts, bringing with them a little fish, a few cocoanuts, and other fruits, which they exchanged for nails, beads, etc. The most of them knew me again, and many inquired for Mr. Banks and others who were with me before, but not one asked for Tupia. As the calm continued, our situation became still more dangerous. We were, however, not without hopes of getting round the western point of the reef and into the bay, till about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when we came before an opening or break in the reef, through which I hoped to get with the ships. But on sending to examine it, I found there was not a sufficient depth of water, though it caused such an indraft of the tide of flood through it, as was very near proving fatal to the Resolution, for as soon as the ships got into the stream, they were carried with great impetuosity towards the reef. The moment I perceived this, I ordered one of the warping machines, which we had in readiness, to be carried out with about 400 fathoms of rope, but it had not the least effect. The horrors of shipwreck now stared us in the face. We were not more than 2 cables' length from the breakers, and yet we could find no bottom to anchor, the only probable means we had left to save the ships. We, however, dropped an anchor, but before it took hold and brought us up, the ship was in less than 3 fathom water, and struck at every fall of the sea, which broke close under our stem in a dreadful surf, and threatened us every moment with shipwreck. The Adventure, very luckily, brought up close upon our bow, without striking. We presently carried out 2 kedge anchors, with hawsers to each. These found ground a little without the bower, but in what depth we never knew. By heaving upon them, and cutting away the bower anchor, we got the ship afloat, where we lay some time in the greatest anxiety, expecting every minute that either the kedges would come home, or the hawsers be cut in two by the rocks. At length the tide ceased to act in the same direction. I ordered all the boats to try to tow off the Resolution, and when I saw this was practicable, we hove up the 2 kedges. At that moment a light air came off from the land, which so much assisted the boats, that we soon got clear of all danger. Then I ordered all the boats to assist the Adventure, but before they reached her, she was under sail with the land breeze, and soon after joined us, leaving behind her 3 anchors, her coasting cable and 2 hawsers, which were never recovered. Thus we were once more safe at sea, after narrowly escaping being wrecked on the very island we but a few days before so ardently wished to be at. The calm, after bringing us into this dangerous situation, very fortunately continued; for had the sea breeze, as is usual, set in, the Resolution must inevitably have been lost, and probably the Adventure too. During the time we were in this critical situation, a number of the natives were on board and about the ships. They seemed to be insensible of our danger, showing not the least surprise, joy, or fear, when we were striking, and left us a little before sunset, quite unconcerned. We spent the night, which proved squally and rainy, making short boards, and the next morning, being the 17th, we anchored in Oaatihipiha Bay, in 12 fathoms water, about 2 cables' lengths from the shore, both ships being by this time crowded with a great number of the natives, who brought with them cocoa-nuts, plantains, bananas, apples, yams, and other roots, which they exchanged for nails and beads. To several, who call themselves chiefs, I made presents of shirts, axes, and several other articles, and in return they promised to bring me hogs and fowls, a promise they never did, nor ever intended to perform. In the afternoon I landed in company with Captain Furneaux, in order to view the watering place, and to sound the disposition of the natives. I also sent a boat to get in some water for present use, having scarcely any left on board. We found this article as convenient as could be expected, and the natives to behave with great civility. Early in the morning I sent the 2 launches and the Resolution's cutter, under the command of Mr Gilbert, to endeavour to recover the anchors we had left behind us. They returned about noon, with the Resolution's bower anchor, but could not recover any of the Adventures. The natives came off again with fruit as the day before, but in no great quantity. I also had a party on shore trading under the protection of a guard. Nothing, however, was brought to market but fruit and roots, though many hogs were seen, I was told, about the houses of the natives. The cry was, that they belonged to Wahitoon, the Iredehi, or king, and him we had not yet seen, nor, I believe, any other chief of note. Many, however, who called themselves Eries, came on board, partly with a view of getting presents, and partly to pilfer whatever came in their way. One of this sort of Eries I had most of the day in the cabin, and made presents to him and all his friends, which were not few. At length he was caught taking things which did not belong to him, and handing them out of the quarter gallery. Many complaints of a like nature were made to me against those on deck, which occasioned my turning them all out of the ship. My cabin guest made good haste to be gone. I was so much exasperated at his behaviour, that after he had gone some distance from the ship, I fired 2 muskets over his head, which made him quit the canoe and take to the water. I then sent a boat to take up the canoe, but as she came near the shore, the people from thence began to pelt her with stones. Being in some pain for her safety, as she was unarmed, I went myself in another boat to protect her, and ordered a great gun, loaded with ball, to be fired along the coast, which made them all retire from the shore, and I was suffered to bring away 2 canoes without the least show of opposition. In one of the canoes was a little boy, who was much frightened, but I soon dissipated his fears, by giving him beads and putting him on shore. A few hours later we were all good friends again, and the canoes were returned to the first person who came for them. It was not till the evening of this day that any one inquired after Tupia, and then but 2 or 3. As soon as they learnt the cause of his death, they were quite satisfied. Indeed, it did not appear to me that it would have caused a moment's uneasiness in the breast of any one, had his death been occasioned by any other means than by sickness. As little inquiry was made after Aotourou, the man who went away with Monsieur de Bougainville; but they were continually asking for Mr. Banks, and several others who were with me in my former voyage. These people informed us that Toutaha, the regent of the greater peninsula of Otaheite, had been killed in a battle, which was fought between the two kingdoms about 5 months before, and that Otoo was the reigning prince. Tubore Tamede, and several more of our principal friends about Matavai, fell in this battle, as also a great number of common people; but at present a peace subsisted between the two kingdoms. On the 19th we had gentle breezes easterly, with some smart showers of rain. Early in the morning the boats were again sent to recover the Adventure's anchors, but returned with the same ill success as the day before; so that we ceased to look for them any longer, thinking ourselves very happy in having come off so well, considering the situation we had been in. In an excursion which Captain Furneaux and I made along the coast, we met with a chief who entertained us with excellent fish, fruit, etc. In return for his hospitality, I made him a present of an axe and other things, and he afterwards accompanied us back to the ships, where he made but a short stay. Nothing worthy of note happened on the 20th, till the dusk of the evening, when one of the natives made off with a musket belonging to the guard on shore. I was present when this happened, and sent some of our people after him, which would have been to little purpose, had not some of the natives, of their own accord, pursued the thief. They knocked him down, took from him the musket, and brought it to us. Fear, on this occasion, certainly operated more with them than principle. They deserve, however, to be applauded for this act of justice; for, if they had not given their immediate assistance, it would hardly have been in my power to have recovered the musket by any gentle means whatever, and by making use of any other, I was sure to lose more than 10 times its value. The 21st the wind was at north, a fresh breeze. This morning a chief made me a visit, and presented me with a quantity of fruit, among which were a number of cocoa nuts we had drawn the water from, and afterwards thrown overboard. These he had picked up, and tied in bundles so artfully, that we did not at first perceive the cheat. When he was told of it, without betraying the least emotion, and as if he knew nothing of the matter, he opened 2 or 3 of them himself, signified to us that he was satisfied it was so, and then went ashore and sent off a quantity of plantains and bananos. Having got on board a supply of water, fruit, and roots, I determined to sail in the morning to Matavai, as I found it was not likely that I should get an interview with Waheatoua, without which it was very improbable we should get any hogs. 2 of the natives who knew my intention slept on board, with a view of going with us to Matavai, but in the morning the wind blew fresh at northwest, and as we could not sail, I sent the trading party on shore as usual. In the evening I was informed that Waheatoua was come into the neighbourhood, and wanted to see me. In consequence of this information, I determined to wait 1 day longer, in order to have an interview with this prince. Accordingly, early the next morning, I set out in company with Captain Furneaux, Mr. Forster, and several of the natives. We met the chief about a mile from the landing place, towards which he was advancing to meet us; but as soon as he saw us, he stopped, with his numerous train, in the open air. I found him seated upon a stool, with a circle of people round him, and knew him at first sight, and he me, having seen each other several times in 1769. At that time he was but a boy, and went by the name of Tearee, but, upon the death of his father, Wahitoon, he took upon him that name. After the first salutation was over, having seated me on the same stool with himself, and the other gentlemen on the ground by us, he began to inquire after several by name who were with me on my former voyage. He next inquired how long I would stay, and when I told him no longer than next day, he seemed sorry, asked me to stay some months, and at last came down to 5 days, promising that in that time I should have hogs in plenty; but as I had been here already a week, without so much as getting one, I could not put any faith in this promise; and yet, I believe, if I had stayed, we should have fared much better than at Matavai. The present I made him consisted of a shirt, a sheet, a broad axe, spike nails, knives, looking glasses, medals, beads, etc. In return he ordered a pretty good hog to be carried to our boat. We stayed with him all the morning, during which time he never suffered me to go from his side, where I was seated. I was also seated on the same stool, which was carried from place to place by one of his attendants, whom he called stool bearer. At length we took leave, in order to return on board to dinner, after which we visited him again, and made him more presents, and he, in return, gave Captain Furneaux and me, each of us, an hog. Some others were got by exchanges at the trading places, so that we got in for the whole to day as much fresh pork as gave the crews of both the ships a meal, and this in consequence of our having had this interview with the chief. The 24th, early in the morning, we put to sea with a light land breeze. Soon after we were out, we got the wind at west, which blew in squalls, attended with heavy showers of rain. Many canoes accompanied us out to sea, with cocoa nuts and other fruits, and did not leave us till they had disposed of their cargoes. The fruits we got here greatly contributed towards the recovery of the Adventure's sick people. Many of them, who had been so ill as not to be able to move without assistance, were, in this short time, so far recovered, that they could walk about of themselves. When we put in here, the Resolution had but one scorbutic man on board, and a marine, who had been long sick, and who died the second day after our arrival, of a complication of disorders, without the least mixture of the scurvy. I left Lieutenant Pickersgill, with the cutter, behind the bay to purchase hogs, as several had promised to bring some down to day, and I was not willing to lose them. On the 25th, about noon, Mr Pickersgill returned with 8 hogs, which he had got at Oatipiha. He spent the night at Ohidea, and was well entertained by Ereti, the chief of that district. It was remarkable that this chief never once asked about Uturu, nor did he take the least notice when Mr Pickersgill mentioned his name. And yet Monsieur de Bougainville tells us this is the very chief who presented Oturu to him, which makes it the more extraordinary that he should neither inquire after him now, nor when he was with us at Matavai, especially as they believed that we and Monsieur de Bougainville came from the same country, that is, from Pretane, for so they called our country. They had not the least knowledge of any other European nation, nor probably will they, unless some of their men should return, who had lately gone from the isle, of which mention shall be made by and by. We told several of them that Monsieur de Bougainville came from France, a name they could by no means pronounce, nor could they pronounce that of Paris much better, so that it is not likely that they will remember either the one or the other long, whereas Pretane is in every child's mouth, and will hardly ever be forgotten. It was not till the evening of this day that we arrived in Matavai Bay. End of Book 1, Chapter 10. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Chapter 11 of A Voyage towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1, by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 11. An account of several visits to and from O2, of goats being left on the island, and many other particulars which happened while the ships lay in Matavai Bay. 1773 August. Before we got to an anchor, our decks were crowded with the natives, many of whom I knew, and almost all of them knew me. A great crowd were gotten together upon the shore, amongst whom was Otu, their king. I was just going to pay him a visit, when I was told that he was Matawad, and gone to Opari. I could not conceive the reason of his going off in a fright, as every one seemed pleased to see me. A chief, whose name was Maritata, was at this time on board, and advised me to put off my visit till the next morning, when he would accompany me, which I accordingly did. After having given directions to pitch tents for the reception of the sick, coopers, sailmakers, and the guard, I set out on the 26th for Opari, accompanied by Captain Furneaux, Mr. Forster and others, Maritata and his wife. As soon as we landed we were conducted to O2, whom we found seated on the ground under the shade of a tree, with an immense crowd around him. After the first compliments were over, I presented him with such articles as I guessed were most valuable in his eyes, well knowing that it was my interest to gain the friendship of this man. I also made presents to several of his attendants, and in return they offered me cloth, which I refused to accept, telling them that what I had given was for Tio friendship. The king inquired for Tupia and all the gentlemen that were with me in my former voyage by name, although I do not remember that he was personally acquainted with any of us. He promised that I should have some hogs the next day, but I had much ado to obtain a promise from him to visit me on board. He said he was Matao no to Popui, that is, afraid of the guns. Indeed, all his actions showed him to be a timorous prince. He was about 30 years of age, 6 feet high, and a fine, personable, well-made man as one could see. All his subjects appeared uncovered before him, his father not excepted. What is meant by uncovering is the making bare the head and shoulders, or wearing no sort of clothing above the breast. When I returned from Opari, I found the tents and the astronomers' observatories set up on the same spot where we observed the transit of Venus in 1769. In the afternoon I had the sick landed, 20 from the Adventure, all ill of the scurvy, and 1 from the Resolution. I also landed some marines for a guard, and left the command to Lieutenant Edgecombe of the Marines. On the 27th, early in the morning, O2, attended by a numerous train, paid me a visit. He first sent into the ship a large quantity of cloth, fruits, a hog, and 2 large fish, and after some persuasion came aboard himself with his sister, a younger brother, and several more of his attendants. To all of these I made presents, and, after breakfast, took the king, his sister, and as many more as I had room for, into my boat, and carried them home to Opari. I had no sooner landed than I was met by a venerable old lady, the mother of the late Tutaha. She seized me by both hands, and burst into a flood of tears, saying, "Tutaha tio no tute mati tuatata." Tutaha, your friend, or the friend of Cook, is dead. I was so much affected with her behaviour, that it would have been impossible for me to have refrained mingling my tears with hers, had not O2 come and taken me from her. I, with some difficulty, prevailed on him to let me see her again, when I gave her an axe and some other things. Captain Furneaux, who was with me, presented the king with 2 fine goats, male and female, which, if taken care of, or rather if no care at all is taken of them, will no doubt multiply. After a short stay we took leave and returned on board. Very early in the morning on the 28th, I sent Mr Pickersgill, with the cutter, as far as Otahourou, to procure hogs. A little after sunrise I had another visit from Otoo, who brought me more cloth, a pig, and some fruit. His sister, who was with him, and some of the attendants came on board, but he and others went to the Adventure with the like present to Captain Furneaux. It was not long before he returned with Captain Furneaux on board the Resolution, when I made him a handsome return for the present he had brought me, and dressed his sister out in the best manner I could. She, the king's brother, and 1 or 2 more, were covered before him to-day. When Otoo came into the cabin, Ereti and some of his friends were sitting there. The moment they saw the king enter, they stripped themselves in great haste, being covered before. Seeing I took notice of it, they said, "Iri, Iri," giving me to understand that it was on account of Otoo being present. This was all the respect they paid him, for they never rose from their seats, nor made him any other obeisance. When the king thought proper to depart, I carried him again to Oparee in my boat, where I entertained him and his people with the bagpipes, of which music they are very fond, and dancing by the seamen. He then ordered some of the people to dance also, which consisted chiefly of contortions. There were some, however, who could imitate the seamen pretty well, both in country dances and hornpipes. While we were here, I had a present of cloth from the late Toutaha's mother. This good old lady could not look upon me without shedding tears. However, she was far more composed than before. When we took leave, the king promised to visit me again the next day, but said that I must first come to him. In the evening Mr Pickersgill came back empty, but with a promise of having some hogs, if he would return in a few days. Next morning after breakfast I took a trip to Oparee, to visit Otoo as he had requested, accompanied by Captain Furneaux and some of the officers. We made him up a present of such things as he had not seen before. One article was a broadsword, at the sight of which he was so intimidated that I had much ado to persuade him to accept of it, and to have it buckled upon him, where it remained but a short time before he desired leave to take it off, and send it out of his sight. Soon after we were conducted to the theatre, where we were entertained with a dramatic hueva, or play, in which were both dancing and comedy. The performers were 5 men and 1 woman, who was no less a person than the king's sister. The music consisted of 3 drums only. It lasted about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and upon the whole was well conducted. It was not possible for us to find out the meaning of the play. Some parts seemed adapted to the present time, as my name was frequently mentioned. Other parts were certainly wholly unconnected with us. It apparently differed in nothing, that is, in the manner of acting it, from those we saw at Ulietea in my former voyage. The dancing dress of the lady was more elegant than any I saw there, by being decorated with long tassels made of feathers hanging from the waist downward. As soon as all was over, the king himself desired me to depart, and sent into the boat different kinds of fruit and fish, ready dressed. With this we returned on board, and the next morning he sent me more fruit and several small parcels of fish. Nothing farther remarkable happened till 10 o'clock in the evening, when we were alarmed with a cry of murder and a great noise on shore near the bottom of the bay, at some distance from our encampment. I suspected that it was occasioned by some of our own people, and immediately armed a boat and sent on shore, to know the occasion of this disturbance, and to bring off such of our people as should be found there. I also sent to the Adventure and to the post on shore to know who was missing; for none were absent from the Resolution but those who were upon duty. The boat soon returned with 3 marines and a seaman. Some others belonging to the Adventure were also taken; and being all put under confinement, the next morning I ordered them to be punished according to their deserts. I did not find that any mischief was done, and our people would confess nothing. I believe this disturbance was occasioned by their making too free with the women. Be this as it will, the natives were so much alarmed that they fled from their habitations in the dead of the night, and the alarm spread many miles along the coast; for when we went to visit Otoo in the morning by appointment, I found him removed, or rather fled, many miles from the place of his abode. Even there I was obliged to wait some hours before I could see him at all, and when I did, he complained of the last night's riot. As this was intended to be my last visit, I had taken with me a present suitable to the occasion. Among other things were 3 Cape sheep, which he had seen before and asked for these people never lose a thing by not asking for it. He was much pleased with them, though he could be but little benefited, as they were all weathers, a thing he was made acquainted with. The presents he got at this interview entirely removed his fears, and opened his heart so much, that he sent for 3 hogs, one for me, one for Captain Furneaux, and one for Mr Forster. This last was small, of which we complained, calling it iti iti. Presently after a man came into the circle, and spoke to the king with some warmth, and in a very peremptory manner, saying something or other about hogs. We at first thought he was angry with the king for giving us so many, especially as he took the little pig away with him. The contrary, however, appeared to be the true cause of his displeasure, for presently, after he was gone, a hog, larger than either of the other 2, was brought us in lieu of the little one. When we took leave, I acquainted him that I should sail from the island the next day, at which he seemed much moved, and embraced me several times. We embarked to return on board, and he, with his numerous train, directed his march back to Oparree. 1773 September. The sick being all pretty well recovered, our water casks repaired and water completed, as well as the necessary repairs of the ships, I determined to put to sea without farther delay. Accordingly, on the 1st of September, I ordered everything to be got off from the shore, and the ships to be unmoored. On this work we were employed the most of the day. In the afternoon Mr Pickersgill returned from Attahourou, to which place I had sent him 2 days before, for the hogs he had been promised. My old friend Patatu, the chief of the district, his wife or mistress, I know not which, and some more of his friends, came along with Mr Pickersgill, in order to visit me. They brought me a present of 2 hogs and some fish, and Mr Pickersgill got 2 more hogs, by exchange for Amu, for he went into the boat as far as Papara, where he saw old Oberea. She seemed much altered for the worst, poor, and of little consequence. The first words she said to Mr Pickersgill were, Iri matau ina boa. Erie is frightened, you can have no hogs. By this it appeared that she had little or no property, and was herself subject to the Erie, which I believe was not the case when I was here before. The wind, which had blown westerly all day, having shifted at once to the east, we put to sea, and I was obliged to dismiss my friends sooner than they wished to go, but well satisfied with the reception they had met with. Some hours before we got under sail, a young man, whose name was Poria, came and desired I would take him with me. I consented, thinking he might be of service to us on some occasion. Many more offered themselves, but I refused to take them. This youth asked me for an axe and a spike nail for his father, who was then on board. He had them accordingly, and they parted just as we were getting under sail, more like two strangers than father and son. This raised a doubt in me whether it was so, which was farther confirmed by a canoe conducted by two men coming alongside as we were standing out in the bay, and demanding the young man in the name of Otoo. I now saw that the whole was a trick to get something from me, well knowing that Otoo was not in the neighbourhood, and could know nothing of the matter. Poreo seemed, however, at first undetermined whether he should go or stay, but he soon inclined to the former. I told him to return me the axe and nails, and that he should go, and so he really should, but they said they were on shore, and so departed. Though the youth seemed pretty well satisfied, he could not refrain from weeping when he viewed the land astern. End of Book 1, Chapter 11. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Chapter 12 of A Voyage towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1, by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 12. An account of the reception we met with at Huaheine, with the incidents that happened while the ships lay there, and of Omai, one of the natives, coming away in the Adventure. 1773 September. As soon as we were clear of the bay and our boats in, I directed my course for the island of Huaheine, where I intended to touch. We made it the next day, and spent the night making short boards under the north end of the island. At daylight in the morning of the 3rd, we made sail for the harbour of Wahare, in which the Resolution anchored about 9 o'clock in 24 fathoms water. As the wind blew out of the harbour, I chose to turn in by the southern channel, it being the widest. The Resolution turned in very well, but the Adventure, missing stays, got ashore on the north side of the channel. I had the Resolution's launch in the water ready, in case of an accident of this kind, and sent her immediately to the Adventure. By this timely assistance she was got off again without receiving any damage. Several of the natives by this time had come off to us, bringing with them some of the productions of the island, and as soon as the ships were both in safety I landed with Captain Furneaux, and was received by the natives with the utmost cordiality. I distributed some presents among them, and they presently after brought down hogs, fowls, dogs, and fruits, which they willingly exchanged for hatchets, nails, beads, etc. The like trade was soon opened on board the ships, so that we had a fair prospect of being plentifully supplied with fresh pork and fowls, and to people in our situation this was no unwelcome thing. I learned that my old friend Oree, chief of the isle, was still living, and that he was hastening to this part to see me. Early next morning Lieutenant Pickersgill sailed with the cutter on a trading party towards the south end of the isle. I also sent another trading party on shore near the ships, with which I went myself, to see that it was properly conducted at the first setting out, a very necessary point to be attended to. Everything being settled in my mind, I went, accompanied by Captain Furneaux and Mr. Forster, to pay my first visit to Oree, who, I was told, was waiting for me. We were conducted to the place by one of the natives, but were not permitted to go out of our boat till we had gone through some part of the following ceremony, usually performed at this isle on such like occasions. The boat in which we were desired to remain being landed before the chief's house, which stood close to the shore, 5 young plantain trees, which are their emblems of peace, were brought on board separately and with some ceremony. 3 young pigs, with their ears ornamented with cocoanut fibres, accompanied the first 3, and a dog the 4th. Each had his particular name and purpose, rather too mysterious for us to understand. Lastly, the chief sent for me the inscription engraved on a small piece of pewter, which I left with him in July 1769. It was in the same bag I had made for it, together with a piece of counterfeit English coin and a few beads, put in at the same time, which shows how well he had taken care of the whole. When they had made an end of putting into the boat the things just mentioned, our guide, who still remained with us, desired us to decorate the young plantain trees with looking glasses, nails, medals, beads, etc., etc. This being accordingly done, we landed with these in our hands, and were conducted towards the chief, through the multitude, they making a lane, as it were, for us to pass through. We were made to sit down a few paces short of the chief, and our plantains were then taken from us, and one by one laid before him, as the others had been laid before us. One was for Itue, or God, the second for the Iri, or King, and the third for Tio, or Friendship. This being done, I wanted to go to the king, but was told that he would come to me, which he accordingly did, fell upon my neck, and embraced me. This was by no means ceremonious. The tears which trickled plentifully down his venerable old cheeks sufficiently bespoke the language of his heart. The whole ceremony being over, all his friends were introduced to us, to whom we made presents. Mine to the chief consisted of the most valuable articles I had, for I regarded this man as a father. In return he gave me a hog and a quantity of cloth, promising that all our wants should be supplied; and it will soon appear how well he kept his word. At length we took leave and returned on board, and some time after Mr. Pickersgill returned also with 14 hogs. Many more were got by exchanges on shore and alongside the ships, besides fowl and fruit in abundance. The good old chief made me a visit early in the morning on the 5th, together with some of his friends, bringing me a hog and some fruit, for which I made him a suitable return. He carried his kindness so far as not to fail to send me every day for my table the very best of ready dressed fruit and roots, and in great plenty. Lieutenant Pickersgill, being again sent with the 2 boats in search of hogs, returned in the evening with 28, and about 4 times that number were purchased on shore and alongside the ships. The next morning the trading party, consisting of only 2 or 3 people, were sent on shore as usual, and after breakfast I went to the place myself, when I learnt that one of the inhabitants had been very troublesome and insolent. This man being pointed out to me, completely equipped in the war habit, with a club in each hand, as he seemed bent on mischief, I took these from him, broke them before his eyes, and, with some difficulty, forced him to retire from the place. As they told me that he was a chief, this made me the more suspicious of him, and occasioned me to send for a guard, which till now I had thought unnecessary. About this time Mr. Sparrman, having imprudently gone out alone botanizing, was set upon by 2 men, who stripped him of everything he had about him, except his trousers, and struck him several times with his own hanger, but happily did him no harm. As soon as they had accomplished their end, they made off, after which another of the natives brought a piece of cloth to cover him, and conducted him to the trading place, where there were a great number of the inhabitants. The very instant Mr. Sparrman appeared in the condition I have just mentioned, they all fled with the utmost precipitation. I at first conjectured they had stolen something, but we were soon undeceived upon Mr. Sparrman's relating the affair to us. As soon as I could recall a few of the natives, and made them sensible that I should take no step to injure those who were innocent, I went to Oree to complain of this outrage, taking with us the man who came back with Mr. Sparrman, to confirm the complaint. As soon as the chief heard the whole affair related, he wept aloud, as did many others. After the first transports of his grief were over, he began to expostulate with his people, telling them, as far as we could understand, how well I had treated them, both in this and my former voyage, and how base it was in them to commit such actions. He then took a very minute account of the things Mr. Sparrman had been robbed of, promised to do all in his power to recover them, and rising up, desired me to follow him to my boat. When the people saw this, being, as I supposed, apprehensive of his safety, they used every argument to dissuade him from what they, no doubt, thought a rash step. He hastened into the boat, notwithstanding all that they could do or say. As soon as they saw their beloved chief wholly in my power, they set up a great outcry. The grief they showed was inexpressible. Every face was bedewed with tears. They prayed, entreated, nay, attempted to pull him out of the boat. I even joined my entreaties to theirs, for I could not bear to see them in such distress. All that could be said or done availed nothing. He insisted on my coming into the boat, which was no sooner done than he ordered it to be put off. His sister, with a spirit equal to that of her royal brother, was the only person who did not oppose his going. As his intention in coming into our boat was to go with us in search of the robbers, we proceeded accordingly as far as was convenient by water, then landed, entered the country, and travelled some miles inland, the chief leading the way, inquiring of every one he saw. At length he stepped into a house by the roadside, ordered some cocoanuts for us, and after we were a little refreshed, wanted to proceed still farther. But this I opposed, thinking that we might be carried to the very farthest end of the island, after things, the most of which, before they came into our hands again, might not be worth the bringing home. The chief used many arguments to persuade me to proceed, telling me that I might send my boat round to meet us, or that he would get a canoe to bring us home, if I thought it too far to travel. But I was resolved to return, and he was obliged to comply and return with me, when he saw I would follow him no farther. I only desired he would send somebody for the things, for I found that the thieves had got so much start of us, that we might follow them to the remotest parts of the isle, without so much as seeing them. Besides, as I intended to sail the next morning, this occasioned a great loss to us, by putting a stop to all manner of trade, for the natives were so much alarmed that none came near us, but those that were about the chief. It therefore became the more necessary for me to return, to restore things to their former state. When we got back to our boat, we there found Oree's sister, and several more persons, who had travelled by land to the place. We immediately stepped into the boat in order to return on board, without so much as asking the chief to accompany us. He, however, insisted on going also, and followed us into the boat in spite of the opposition and entreaties of those about him. His sister followed his example, and the tears and prayers of her daughter, who was about 16 or 18 years of age, had no weight with her on this occasion. The chief sat at table with us, and made a hearty dinner. His sister, according to custom, ate nothing. After dinner I sufficiently rewarded them for the confidence they had put in me, and soon after carried them both on shore, where some hundreds of people waited to receive them, many of whom embraced their chief with tears of joy. All was now joy and peace. The people crowded in from every part, with hogs, fowls, and fruit, so that we presently filled 2 boats. Oree himself presented me with a large hog and a quantity of fruit. The hanger, the only thing of value Mr. Sparrman had lost, with part of his coat, were brought us, and we were told we should have the others the next day. Some of the officers who were out on a shooting party had some things stolen from them, which were returned in like manner. Thus ended the troublesome transactions of this day, which I have been the more particular in relating, because it shows what great confidence this brave old chief put in us. It also in some degree shows that friendship is sacred with them. Oree and I were professed friends in all the forms customary among them, and he seemed to think that this could not be broken by the act of any other persons. Indeed, this seemed to be the great argument he made use of to his people, when they opposed his going into my boat. His words were to this effect: Ori, meaning me, for so I was always called, and I are friends. I have done nothing to forfeit his friendship. Why then should I not go with him? We, however, may never find another chief who will act in the same manner, under similar circumstances. It may be asked, what had he to fear? To which I answer, nothing, for it was not my intention to hurt a hair of his head, or to detain him a moment longer than he desired. But how was he or the people to know this? They were not ignorant, that if he was once in my power, the whole force of the island could not take him from me, and that, let my demands for his ransom have been ever so high, they must have complied with them. Thus far their fears, both for his and their own safety, were founded in reason. On the 7th, early in the morning, while the ships were unmooring, I went to pay my farewell visit to Ori, accompanied by Captain Furneaux and Mr. Forster. We took with us, for a present, such things as were not only valuable but useful. I also left with him the inscription plate he had before in keeping, and another small copper plate, on which were engraved these words: Anchored here, His Britannic Majesty's ships Resolution and Adventure, September 1773, together with some medals, all put up in a bag, of which the chief promised to take care, and to produce to the first ship or ships that should arrive at the island. He then gave me a hog, and after trading for 6 or 8 more, and loading the boat with fruit, we took leave, when the good old chief embraced me with tears in his eyes. At this interview nothing was said about the remainder of Mr. Sparrman's clothes. I judged they were not brought in, and for that reason did not mention them, lest I should give the chief pain about things I did not give him time to recover, for this was early in the morning. When we returned to the ships, we found them crowded round with canoes full of hogs, fowls, and fruit, as at our first arrival. I had not been long on board before Ori himself came to inform me, as we understood, that the robbers were taken, and to desire us to go on shore, either to punish, or to see them punished. But this could not be done, as the Resolution was just under sail, and the Adventure already out of the harbour. The chief stayed on board till we were a full half league out at sea, then took a most affectionate leave of me, and went away in a canoe, conducted by one man and himself, all the others having gone long before. I was sorry that it was not convenient for me to go on shore with him, to see in what manner these people would have been punished, for I am satisfied this was what brought him on board. During our short stay at the small but fertile island of Huahine, we procured to both ships not less than 300 hogs, besides fowls and fruits, and had we stayed longer, might have got many more. For none of these articles for refreshment were seemingly diminished, but appeared everywhere in as great abundance as ever. Before we quitted this island, Captain Furneaux agreed to receive on board his ship a young man named Omai, a native of Ulitea, where he had some property, of which he had been dispossessed by the people of Bolabola. I at first rather wondered that Captain Furneaux would encumber himself with this man, who, in my opinion, was not a proper sample of the inhabitants of these happy islands, not having any advantage of birth or acquired rank, nor being eminent in shape, figure, or complexion. For their people of the first rank are much fairer, and usually better behaved and more intelligent, than the middling class of people, among whom Omai is to be ranked. I have, however, since my arrival in England, been convinced of my error; for excepting his complexion, which is undoubtedly of a deeper hue than that of the Eries or gentry, who, as in other countries, live a more luxurious life, and are less exposed to the heat of the sun, I much doubt whether any other of the natives would have given more general satisfaction by his behaviour among us. Omai has most certainly a very good understanding, quick parts, and honest principles. He has a natural good behaviour, which rendered him acceptable to the best company, and a proper degree of pride, which taught him to avoid the society of persons of inferior rank. He has passions of the same kind as other young men, but has judgment enough not to indulge them in any improper excess. I do not imagine that he has any dislike to liquor, and if he had fallen into company where the person who drank the most met with the most approbation, I have no doubt but that he would have endeavoured to gain the applause of those with whom he associated. But, fortunately for him, he perceived that drinking was very little in use but among inferior people, and as he was very watchful into the manners and conduct of the persons of rank who honoured him with their protection, he was sober and modest, and I never heard that, during the whole time of his stay in England, which was 2 years, he ever once was disguised with wine, or even showed an inclination to go beyond the strictest rules of moderation. Soon after his arrival in London, the Earl of Sandwich, the First Lord of the Admiralty, introduced him to his Majesty at Kew, where he met with the most gracious reception, and imbibed the strongest impression of duty and gratitude to that great and amiable prince, which I am persuaded he will preserve to the latest moment of his life. During his stay among us he was caressed by many of the principal nobility, and did nothing to forfeit the esteem of any one of them. But his principal patrons were the Earl of Sandwich, Mr. Banks, and Dr. Solander. The former probably thought it a duty of his office to protect and countenance an inhabitant of that hospitable country, where the wants and distresses of those in his department had been alleviated and supplied in the most ample manner. The others as a testimony of their gratitude for the generous reception they had met with during their residence in his country. It is to be observed that though Omai lived in the midst of amusements during his residence in England, his return to his native country was always in his thoughts, and though he was not impatient to go, he expressed a satisfaction as the time of his return approached. He embarked with me in the Resolution, when she was fitted out for another voyage, loaded with presents from his several friends, and full of gratitude for the kind reception and treatment he had experienced among us. End of Book 1, Chapter 12. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Chapter 13 of A Voyage towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1, by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 13. Arrival at and departure of the ships from Ulitea, with an account of what happened there, and of Oedidi, one of the natives, coming away in the Resolution. 1773 September. The chief was no sooner gone than we made sail for Ulitea, where I intended to stop a few days. Arriving off the harbour of Ohamaneno at the close of the day, we spent the night making short boards. It was dark, but we were sufficiently guided by the fishers' lights on the reefs and shoals of the isles. The next morning, after making a few trips, we gained the entrance of the harbour, and as the wind blew directly out, I sent a boat to lie in soundings, that we might know when to anchor. As soon as the signal was made by her, we borrowed close to the south point of the channel, and with our sails set, shooting within the boat, we anchored in 17 fathoms water. We then carried out anchors and hawsers to warp in by, and as soon as the Resolution was out of the way, the Adventure came up in like manner, and warped in by the Resolution. The warping in and mooring the ships took up the whole day. We were no sooner at anchor at the entrance of the harbour, than the natives crowded round us in their canoes with hogs and fruit. The latter they exchanged for nails and beads. The former we refused as yet, having already as many on board as we could manage. Several we were, however, obliged to take. As many of the principal people brought off little pigs, pepper, or avoa root, and young plantain trees, and handed them into the ship, or put them into the boats alongside, whether we would or no; for if we refused to take them on board, they would throw them into the boats. In this manner did these good people welcome us to their country. I had forgot to mention that Tupia was much inquired after at Huaheine, but at this place every one asked about him and the occasion of his death, and, like true philosophers, were perfectly satisfied with the answers we gave them. Indeed, as we had nothing but the truth to tell, the story was the same, by whomsoever told. Next morning we paid a formal visit to Oreo, the chief of this part of the isle, carrying with us the necessary presents. We went through no sort of ceremony at landing, but were at once conducted to him. He was seated in his own house, which stood near the water side, where he and his friends received us with great cordiality. He expressed much satisfaction at seeing me again, and desired that we might exchange names, which I accordingly agreed to. I believe this is the strongest mark of friendship they can show to a stranger. He inquired after Tupia, and all the gentlemen by name, who were with me when I first visited the island. After we had made the chief and his friends the necessary presents, we went on board with a hog and some fruit, received from him in return; and in the afternoon he gave me another hog, still larger, without asking for the least acknowledgment. Exchanges for fruit, etc., were mostly carried on alongside the ships. I attempted to trade for these articles on shore, but did not succeed, as the most of them were brought in canoes from distant parts and carried directly to the ships. After breakfast on the 10th, Captain Furneaux and I paid the chief a visit, and were entertained by him with such a comedy or dramatic heava as is generally acted in these isles. The music consisted of 3 drums, the actors were 7 men and 1 woman, the chief's daughter. The only entertaining part in the drama was a theft committed by a man and his accomplice, in such a masterly manner, as sufficiently displayed the genius of the people in this vice. The theft is discovered before the thief has time to carry off his prize. Then a scuffle ensues with those set to guard it, who, though 4 to 2, are beat off the stage, and the thief and his accomplices bear away their plunder in triumph. I was very attentive to the whole of this part, being in full expectation that it would have ended very differently; for I had before been informed that Tito, that is the thief, was to be acted, and had understood that the theft was to be punished with death, or a good tiparaheing, or beating, a punishment, we are told, they inflict on such as are guilty of this crime. Be this as it may, strangers are certainly excluded from the protection of this law. Them they rob with impunity on every occasion that offers. After the play was over we returned on board to dinner, and in the cool of the evening took a walk on shore, where we learnt from one of the natives that 9 small islands, 2 of which were uninhabited, lay to the westward, at no great distance from hence. In the 11th, early in the morning, I had a visit from Oreo and his son, a youth about 12 years of age. The latter brought me a hog and some fruit, for which I made him a present of an axe, and dressed him in a shirt, and other things, which made him not a little proud of himself. Having stayed some hours, they went on shore, as I also did soon after, but to another part. The chief, hearing I was on shore, came to the place where he found the boat, into which he put a hog and a quantity of fruit, without saying a word to anybody, and, with some of his friends, came on board and dined with us. After supper I had a visit from Uru, the principal chief of the isle. He was introduced to us by Oreo, and brought with him, as a present, a large hog, for which I made him a handsome return. Oreo employed himself in buying hogs for me, for we now began to take of them, and he made such bargains as I had reason to be satisfied with. At length they all took leave, after making me promise to visit them next morning, which I accordingly did, in company with several of the officers and gentlemen. Oreo ordered a heaver to be acted for our entertainment, in which two very pretty young women were the actresses. This heaver was somewhat different from the one I saw before, and not so entertaining. Oreo, after it was over, accompanied us on board, together with two of his friends. The next day was spent much in the same manner, and early in the morning on the 14th I sent Mr Pickersgill, with the Resolution's launch and Adventure's cutter, to Otaha, to procure an additional supply of bananos and plantains for a sea store, for we could get little more of these articles at Ulietea than were sufficient for present consumption. Oreo and some of his friends paid me a pretty early visit this morning. I acquainted the chief that I would dine with him, and desired he would order 2 pigs to be dressed after their manner, which he accordingly did, and, about 1 o'clock, I, and the officers and gentlemen of both ships, went to partake of them. When we came to the chief's house, we found the cloth laid, that is, green leaves were strewed thick on the floor. Round them we seated ourselves. Presently one of the pigs came over my head sus upon the leaves, and immediately after the other, both so hot as hardly to be touched. The table was garnished round with hot bread, fruit, and plantains, and a quantity of cocoa nuts brought for drink. Each man being ready, with his knife in his hand, we turned to without ceremony; and it must be owned, in favour of their cookery, that victuals were never cleaner, nor better dressed. For, though the pigs were served up whole, and one weighed between 50 and 60 pounds, and the other about half as much, yet all the parts were equally well done, and eat much sweeter than if dressed in any of our methods. The chief and his son, and some other of his male friends, eat with us, and pieces were handed to others who sat behind; for we had a vast crowd about us, so that it might be truly said we dined in public. The chief never failed to drink his glass of Madeira whenever it came to his turn, not only now, but at all other times when he dined with us, without ever being once affected by it. As soon as we had dined, the boat's crew took the remainder, and by them and those about them the whole was consumed. When we rose up, many of the common people rushed in, to pick up the crumbs which had fallen, and for which they searched the leaves very narrowly. This leads me to believe, that though there is plenty of pork at these isles, but little falls to their share. Some of our gentlemen being present when these pigs were killed and dressed, observed the chief to divide the entrails, lard, etc., into 10 or 12 equal parts, and serve it out to certain people. Several daily attended the ships, and assisted the butchers, for the sake of the entrails of the hogs we killed. Probably little else falls to the share of the common people. It, however, must be owned, that they are exceedingly careful of every kind of provision, and waste nothing that can be eaten by man, flesh and fish especially. In the afternoon we were entertained with a play. Plays, indeed, had been acted almost every day since we had been here, either to entertain us, or for their own amusement, or perhaps both. Next morning produced some circumstances which fully prove the timorous disposition of these people. We were surprised to find that none of them came off to the ships as usual. 2 men belonging to the Adventure having stayed on shore all night, contrary to orders, my first conjectures were, that the natives had stripped them, and were now afraid to come near us, lest we should take some step to revenge the insult. But in order to be better satisfied, Captain Furneaux and I went ashore to Oreo's house, which we found quite empty, he and all his family gone, and the whole neighbourhood in a manner quite deserted. The two men belonging to the Adventure made their appearance, and informed us that they had been very civilly treated by the natives, but could give no account of the cause of their precipitate flight. All that we could learn from the very few that durst come near us, was, that several were killed, others wounded by our guns, pointing out to us where the balls went in and out of the body, etc. This relation gave me a good deal of uneasiness, for the safety of our people gone to Otaha, fearing that some disturbance had happened at that island. However, in order to be better informed, I determined, if possible, to see the chief himself. Accordingly we embarked in our boat, having one of the natives with us, and rowed along shore to the northward, the way we were told he was gone. We soon came in sight of the canoe in which he was, but before we could come up with her he had gone on shore. We landed presently after, and found he was gone still further. An immense crowd, however, waited our landing, who entreated me to follow him. One man offered to carry me on his back, but the whole story appearing rather more mysterious than ever, and being all unarmed, I did not choose to separate myself from the boat, but embarked again, and rowed after him. We soon came before the place where our guide told us he was, and put in the boat accordingly. It grounded at some distance from the shore, where we were met by a venerable old lady, wife to the chief. She threw herself into my arms and wept bitterly, insomuch that it was not possible to get one plain word from her. With this old lady in my hand I went ashore, contrary to the advice of my young man from Otaheite, who was more afraid than any of us, probably believing every word the people had told us. I found the chief seated under the shade of a house, before which was a large area, and surrounded by a vast number of people. As soon as I came to him, he threw his arms about me, and burst into tears, in which he was accompanied by all the women, and some of the men, so that the lamentation became general. Astonishment alone kept me from joining with them. It was some time before I could get a word from any one. At last all my enquiries gave me no other information than that they were alarmed on account of our boats being absent, thinking that the people in them had deserted from us, and that I should take some violent means to recover them. For when we assured them that the boats would return back, they seemed cheerful and satisfied, and to a man denied that any one was hurt, either of their own or our people, and so it afterwards proved. Nor did it appear that there was the least foundation for these alarms, nor could we ever find out by what means this general consternation first took its rise. After a stay of about an hour I returned on board, 3 of the natives coming along with us, who proclaimed the peace as we rowed along shore to all they saw. Thus matters were again restored to their former footing, and the next morning they came off to the ships as usual. After breakfast, Captain Furneaux and I paid the chief a visit. We found him at his own house perfectly easy, insomuch that he and some of his friends came on board and dined with us. I was now told that my Otaheitean young man, Poreo, had taken a resolution to leave me. I have just mentioned before his being with us when I followed Oreo, and his advising me not to go on shore. He was so much afraid at that time, that he remained in the boat till he heard all matters were reconciled. Then he came out, and presently after met with a young woman, for whom he had contracted a friendship. Having my powder horn in keeping, he came and gave it to one of my people, who was by me, and then went away with her, and I saw him no more. In the afternoon our boat returned from Otaha, pretty well laden with plantains, an article we were most in want of. They made the circuit of the island, conducted by one of the Eries, whose name was Boba, and were hospitably entertained by the people, who provided them with victuals and lodging. The first night they were entertained with a play, the second their repose was disturbed by the natives stealing their military chest. This put them on making reprisals, by which means they recovered the most of what they had lost. Having now got on board a large supply of refreshments, I determined to put to sea the next morning, and made the same known to the chief, who promised to see me again before we departed. At 4 o'clock we began to unmoor, and as soon as it was light, Oreo, his son, and some of his friends came aboard. Many canoes also came off with fruit and hogs. The latter they even begged of us to take from them, calling them Tia Boa Ato. I am your friend, take my hog and give me an axe. But our decks were already so full of them that we could hardly move, having on board both ships between 300 and 400. By the increase of our stock, together with what we had salted and consumed, I judged that we got at this island 400 or upwards. Many indeed were only roasters, others again weighed 100 pounds or upwards, but the general run was from 40 to 60. It is not easy to say how many we might have got, could we have found room for all that were offered us. The chief and his friends, who did not leave me till we were under sail, and before he went away, pressed me much to know, if I would not return and when. Questions which were daily put to me by many of these islanders. My Otaheiteans youths leaving me proved of no consequence, as many young men of this island voluntarily offered to come away with us. I thought proper to take on board one, who was about 17 or 18 years of age, named Odidi, a native of Bola Bola, and a near relation of the great Oponi, chief of that island. Soon after we were out of the harbour, and had made sail, we observed a canoe following us, conducted by 2 men, whereupon I brought to, and they presently came alongside, having brought me a present of roasted fruit and roots from Oreo. I made them a proper return before I dismissed them, and then set sail to the west, with the Adventure in company. End of Book 1, Chapter 13. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Chapter 14 of A Voyage towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1, by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 14. An account of a Spanish ship visiting Otaheite, the present state of the islands, with some observations on the diseases and customs of the inhabitants, and some mistakes concerning the women corrected. 1773 September. I shall now give some farther account of these islands, for although I have been pretty minute in relating the daily transactions, some things which are rather interesting have been omitted. Soon after our arrival at Otaheite, we were informed that a ship about the size of the Resolution had been at Oahuahura harbour, near the south-east end of the island, where she remained about 3 weeks, and had been gone about 3 months before we arrived. We were told that 4 of the natives were gone away with her, whose names were Debe de Bea, Pa'audau, Tanadui, and Ofahaya. At this time we conjectured this was a French ship, but on our arrival at the Cape of Good Hope, we learnt she was a Spaniard, which had been sent out from America. The Otaheitans complained of a disease communicated to them by the people in this ship, which they said affected the head, throat, and stomach, and at length killed them. They seemed to dread it much, and were continually inquiring if we had it. This ship they distinguished by the name of Pahai no Pepe, ship of Pepe, and call the disease apa no pepe, just as they call the venereal disease apa no pratanae, English disease, although they, to a man, say it was brought to the isle by Monsieur de Bougainville. But I have already observed that they thought Monsieur de Bougainville came from Pratana, as well as every other ship which has touched at the isle. Were it not for this assertion of the natives, and none of Captain Wallis's people being afflicted with the venereal disease, either while they were at Otaheite or after they left it, I should have concluded that long before these islanders were visited by Europeans, this or some disease which is near akin to it had existed among them. For I have heard them speak of people dying of a disorder which we interpreted to be the pox before that period. But, be this as it will, it is now far less common amongst them than it was in the year 1769, when I first visited these isles. They say they can cure it, and so it fully appears, for, notwithstanding most of my people had made pretty free with the women, very few of them were afterwards afflicted with the disorder, and those who were, had it in so slight a manner, that it is easily removed. But among the natives, whenever it turns to a pox, they tell us it is incurable. Some of our people pretend to have seen some of them who had this last disorder in a high degree, but the surgeon, who made it his business to inquire, could never satisfy himself in this point. These people are, and were, before Europeans visited them, very subject to scrofulous diseases, so that a seaman might easily mistake one disorder for another. The island of Otaheite, which in the years 1767 and 1768, as it were, swarmed with hogs and fowls, was now so ill supplied with these animals that hardly anything could induce the owners to part with them. The few they had at this time among them seemed to be at the disposal of the kings, for while we lay at Oatipihi Bay, in the kingdom of Tiaraboo, or Lesser Peninsula, every hog and fowl we saw, we were told, belonged to Wahiatua, and all we saw in the kingdom of Opurenu, or the Greater Peninsula, belonged to Otu. During the 17 days we were at this island, we got but 24 hogs, the half of which came from the two kings themselves, and I believe the other half were sold to us by their permission or order. We were, however, abundantly supplied with all the fruits the island produces, except breadfruit, which was not in season either at this or the other isles. Coconuts and plantains were what we got the most of. The latter, together with a few yams and other roots, were to us a succedaneum for bread. At Otaheite we got great plenty of apples, and a fruit like a nectarine, called by them ahiva. This fruit is common to all the isles, but apples we got only at Otaheite, and found them of infinite use to the scorbutic people. Of all the seeds that have been brought to these islands by Europeans, none have succeeded but pumpkins, and these they do not like, which is not to be wondered at. The scarcity of hogs at Otaheite may be owing to two causes. First, to the number which have been consumed and carried off by the shipping, which have touched here of late years, and secondly, to the frequent wars between the two kingdoms. We know of two since the year 1767. At present a peace subsists between them, though they do not seem to entertain much friendship for each other. I never could learn the cause of the late war, nor who got the better in the conflict. In the battle, which put an end to the dispute, many were killed on both sides. On the part of Opurenu fell Tutaha, and several other chiefs who were mentioned to me by name. Tutaha lies interred in the family Marai at Opari, and his mother and several other women, who were of his household, are now taken care of by Otu, the reigning prince, a man who, at first, did not appear to us to much advantage. I know but little of Wahiatua of Tiaraboo. This prince, who is not above 20 years of age, appeared with all the gravity of a man of 50. His subjects do not uncover before him, or pay him any outward obeisance, as is done to Otoo. Nevertheless, they seem to show him full as much respect, and he appeared in rather more state. He was attended by a few middle-aged or elderly men, who seemed to be his counsellors. This is what appeared to me to be the then state of Otaheite. The other islands, that is Wahine, Ulitea, and Otaha, were in a more flourishing state than they were when I was there before. Since that time they had enjoyed the blessing of peace. The people seemed to be as happy as any under heaven, and well they may, for they possess not only the necessaries, but many of the luxuries of life in the greatest profusion. And my young man told me that hogs, fowls, and fruits are in equal plenty at Bolabola, a thing which Tupia would never allow. To clear up this seeming contradiction, I must observe that the one was prejudiced against, and the other in favour of, this isle. The produce of the islands, the manners and customs of the natives, etc., having been treated at large in the narrative of my former voyage, it will be unnecessary to take notice of these subjects in this, unless where I can add new matter, or clear up any mistakes which may have been committed. As I had some reason to believe that, amongst their religious customs, human sacrifices were sometimes considered as necessary, I went one day to a marae in Matavai, in company with Captain Furneaux, having with us, as I had upon all other occasions, one of my men who spoke their language tolerably well, and several of the natives, one of whom appeared to be an intelligent, sensible man. In the marae was a tupapau, on which lay a corpse and some viands, so that everything promised success to my inquiries. I began with asking questions relating to the several objects before me, if the plantains, etc., were for the Eatua, if they sacrificed the Eatua, hogs, dogs, fowls, etc., to all of which he answered the affirmative. I then asked if they sacrificed men to the Eatua. He answered ta ino, that is, bad men they first did teparehe, or beating them till they were dead. I then asked him if good men were put to death in this manner. His answer was no, only ta ino. I asked him if any eres were. He said they had hogs to give to the Eatua, and again repeated tatu ino. I next asked if tautaus, that is, servants or slaves, who had no hogs, dogs, or fowls, but yet were good men, if they were sacrificed to the Eatua. His answer was no, only bad men. I asked him several more questions, and all his answers seemed to tend to this one point, that men for certain crimes were condemned to be sacrificed to the gods, provided they had not wherewithal to redeem themselves. This, I think, implies that on some occasions human sacrifices are considered as necessary, particularly when they take such men as have, by the laws of their country, forfeited their lives, and have nothing to redeem them, and such will generally be found among the lower class of people. The man of whom I made these inquiries, as well as some others, took some pains to explain the whole of this custom to us, but we were not masters enough of their language to understand them. I have since learned from Omai that they offer human sacrifices to the Supreme Being. According to his account, what men shall be so sacrificed depends on the caprice of the high priest, who, when they are assembled on any solemn occasion, retires alone into the house of God, and stays there some time. When he comes out he informs them that he has seen and conversed with their great God, the high priest alone having that privilege, and that he has asked for a human sacrifice, and tells them that he has desired such a person, naming a man present, whom, most probably, the priest has an antipathy against. He is immediately killed, and so falls a victim to the priest's resentment, who, no doubt, if necessary, has address enough to persuade the people that he was a bad man. If I accept their funeral ceremonies, all the knowledge that has been obtained of their religion has been from information, and as their language is but imperfectly understood, even by those who pretend to the greatest knowledge of it, very little on this head is yet known with certainty. The liquor which they make from the plant called ava ava is expressed from the root, and not from the leaves, as mentioned in the narrative of my former voyage. The manner of preparing this liquor is as simple as it is disgusting to a European. It is thus: several people take some of the root and chew it till it is soft and pulpy. Then they spit it out into a platter or other vessel, every one into the same. When a sufficient quantity is chewed, more or less water is put to it, according as it is to be strong or weak. The juice thus diluted is strained through some fibrous stuff like fine shavings, after which it is fit for drinking, and this is always done immediately. It has a pepperish taste, drinks flat and rather insipid. But though it is intoxicating, I only saw one instance where it had that effect, as they generally drink it with great moderation, and but little at a time. Sometimes they chew this root in their mouths, as Europeans do tobacco, and swallow their spittle, and sometimes I have seen them eat it wholly. At Ulietea they cultivate great quantities of this plant, at Otaheite but very little. I believe there are but few islands in this sea that do not produce more or less of it, and the natives apply it to the same use as appears by Le Maire's account of Horn Island, in which he speaks of the natives making a liquor from a plant in the same manner as above mentioned. Great injustice has been done the women of Otaheite and the Society Isles, by those who have represented them, without exception, as ready to grant the last favour to any man who will come up to their price. But this is by no means the case. The favours of married women, and also the unmarried of the better sort, are as difficult to be obtained here as in any other country whatsoever. Neither can the charge be understood indiscriminately of the unmarried of the lower class, for many of these admit of no such familiarities. That there are prostitutes here, as well as in other countries, is very true, perhaps more in proportion, and such were those who came on board the ships to our people, and frequented the post we had on shore. By seeing these mix indiscriminately with those of a different turn, even of the first rank, one is at first inclined to think that they are all disposed the same way, and that the only difference is in the price. But the truth is, the woman who becomes a prostitute does not seem, in their opinion, to have committed a crime of so deep a dye as to exclude her from the esteem and society of the community in general. On the whole, a stranger who visits England might, with equal justice, draw the characters of the women there, from those which he might meet with on board the ships in one of the naval ports, or in the purlieus of Covent Garden and Drury Lane. I must, however, allow that they are all completely versed in the art of coquetry, and that very few of them fix any bounds to their conversation. It is therefore no wonder that they have obtained the character of libertines. To what has been said of the geography of these isles, in the narrative of my former voyage, I shall now only add, that we found the latitude of Otaheite Bay, in Otaheite, to be 17 degrees 43 minutes 26 seconds south, and the longitude 0 degrees 21 minutes 25½ seconds east from Point Venus, or 149 degrees 13 minutes 24 seconds west from Greenwich. The difference both of latitude and longitude between Point Venus and Otaheite Piha is greater than I supposed it to be, when I made the circuit of the island in 1769 by 2 miles and 4 3/4 miles respectively. It is therefore highly probable that the whole island is of a greater extent than I at that time estimated it to be. The astronomers set up their observatory and made their observations on Point Venus, the latitude of which they found to be 17 degrees 29 minutes 13 seconds south. This differs but 2 seconds from that which Mr. Green and I found, and its longitude, viz. 149 degrees 34 minutes 49½ seconds west, for anything that is yet known to the contrary, is as exact. Mr. Kendall's watch was found to be gaining on mean time 8 seconds 863 per day, which is only 0 seconds 142 less than at Queen Charlotte Sound. Consequently its error in longitude was trifling. End of Book 1, Chapter 14. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts.